Welcome back to HistoryCrafts, where we explore pivotal moments and figures from our shared past. Today, we're delving into one of the most complex and impactful conflicts of the 19th century, the Opium Wars between the British Empire and Qing China. These wars, fought between 1839 and 1860, reshaped global trade and political power in Asia, and their legacy reverberates even today. To understand these conflicts, we need to begin with the central commodity that fueled them: opium. Opium is a powerful and addictive drug derived from the poppy plant. In the 19th century, it was widely used for medicinal purposes, particularly as a pain reliever and sedative. However, when smoked, opium produced intense euphoria, leading to widespread recreational use and addiction. For British merchants, opium represented an incredibly lucrative business, especially in trade with China. By the 1820s, opium was being smuggled into China in vast quantities, with British traders profiting immensely. The trade in opium allowed Britain to correct its trade deficit with China, which had previously been dominated by Chinese exports of tea, silk and porcelain, all in high demand in Europe. But what led to this conflict? It wasn't just the opium itself, but a broader clash of empires and ideologies. So let's first take a look at the two major players in this conflict: the British Empire and Qing dynasty China. Chapter 1. The Two Superpowers. At the time of the Opium Wars, the British Empire stood as the most powerful and far-reaching empire on the globe, controlling vast territories that stretched across continents. By the early 19th century, Britain had already established itself as a global superpower, with colonies and trading posts in Asia, Africa, the Americas, and Oceania. Its dominance was fueled by the Industrial Revolution, which had transformed Britain into the workshop of the world. British factories churned out mass-produced goods, feeding a worldwide market, while its unrivaled navy patrolled trade routes that linked Britain to its far-flung colonies. At the heart of this empire was India, the jewel in the crown, which provided both resources and soldiers that bolstered British power. British territories like Singapore and later Hong Kong became vital hubs of trade in Asia. In Africa, colonies like South Africa and outposts in Sierra Leone and Gambia offered strategic control. The empire's reach also stretched across the Pacific, with settlements in Australia and New Zealand, and across the Americas, where colonies in Canada and the Caribbean flourished. The British Empire's global dominance was further solidified through strategic naval bases like Gibraltar, Malta and Aden, which secured its control over key maritime routes. By the time of the Opium Wars, the empire was vast, with territories spanning nearly a quarter of the Earth's landmass, ruling over hundreds of millions of people. However, one of the biggest challenges the British faced was their reliance on foreign goods, particularly Chinese tea. During the time of the Opium Wars, China was ruled by the Qing dynasty, one of the largest and oldest empires in the world. Not only did they control the mainland, but also regions like Tibet, Xinjiang and Mongolia. China was highly self-sufficient and had been for centuries. The term Sinocentric refers to China's traditional view of itself as the cultural and political center of the world, often seeing foreign nations as less advanced or even barbaric. This attitude shaped China's foreign policy, particularly its strict control over trade. China's economy was based largely on silver, and the empire was rich in highly coveted goods like silk and porcelain. However, China saw little value in Western goods and allowed foreign trade only through designated ports, especially Canton under the Canton system. This system severely limited foreign merchants' activities, contributing to tensions between China and European powers. By the early 19th century, the Qing dynasty had reigned for nearly 2 centuries, but it was facing significant challenges. Internally, corruption, economic stagnation, and frequent rebellions weakened the government's hold over its vast population. Despite these issues, China maintained a strict policy of limited foreign trade, with all foreign merchants confined to the southern port of Guangzhou. China's exports of tea, silk and porcelain were highly sought after by Western nations, especially Britain, but China had little interest in Western goods. This led to a trade imbalance that Britain sought to fix by introducing opium into China. The resulting opium trade had devastating consequences for China, causing widespread addiction and social unrest. Recognizing the damage, Emperor Daoguang and the Qing government attempted to ban the opium trade and confiscated large stocks of the drug. However, Britain, unwilling to lose its lucrative trade, responded with military force, sparking the First Opium War in 1839. You are probably now wondering, how did the British Empire get its hand on opium? Well, it had something to do with the expansion of the empire. The British East India Company was a powerful and influential trading corporation that played a central role in British imperial expansion during the 18th and early 19th centuries. It was formed in 1600 as a profit-driven enterprise through a royal charter from Queen Elizabeth I, designed to monopolize English trade in Asia. But it soon grew into a powerful quasi-governmental entity that exploited resources and people across vast territories for commercial gain and imperial expansion. By the time of the Opium Wars, the company was at the peak of its power, controlling vast territories, particularly in India, which was often referred to as the jewel in the crown of the British Empire. The company initially focused on trade, dealing in spices, silk, and cotton. However, by the early 19th century, it had transitioned into a major political and military force, ruling large parts of India through its private army and acting as an agent of British imperial policy. At this time, the company played a pivotal role in cultivating and exporting opium grown in India, which it smuggled into China in exchange for silver. This illegal trade was extremely profitable and became a key element in Britain's economic strategy to address its trade deficit with China. The company's aggressive expansion in Asia, particularly through the opium trade, was a major factor that led to the Opium Wars with China. Although the British East India Company was a private enterprise, it acted with the support and authority of the British government, making it a unique blend of corporation and state power. Its influence began to decline after the Indian Rebellion of 1857, leading to the British government taking direct control of India in 1858, marking the end of the company's rule. However, during the time of the Opium Wars, the company was a dominant force in both global trade and British imperialism. Chapter 2. The First Opium War. The First Opium War erupted in 1839 as a result of these growing tensions over the opium trade. To understand the conflict, we must look at the actions of Lin Zexu, an official appointed by the Qing Emperor Daoguang to stop the illegal trade. Lin took a hardline approach, seizing and destroying over 20,000 chests of opium in the port of Canton. This decisive act sparked outrage among British merchants and officials who demanded compensation for their losses. When negotiations broke down, the British government resorted to military force. The war saw Britain deploy its superior naval and military capabilities. British warships, including the steam-powered Nemesis, dominated China's antiquated naval forces. The conflict began with the Battle of Kowloon in November 1839, and over the next 3 years, British forces captured key coastal cities, including Amoy and Ningbo. China's military, relying on outdated tactics and weapons, was unable to mount an effective defense against British steamships and advanced artillery. One of the decisive battles was the Battle of Zhenjiang in 1842, where British forces effectively cut off China's key supply lines along the Yangtze River. Facing repeated defeats and a crippled economy, the Qing government sued for peace. The war officially ended with the signing of the Treaty of Nanjing in August 1842. This treaty forced China to pay an indemnity to Britain for the destroyed opium, cede the island of Hong Kong to Britain, open 5 key ports to British trade, including Canton and Shanghai, grant extraterritorial rights to British citizens in China, meaning they were subject only to British law while in China. The Treaty of Nanjing marked the beginning of what would become known as the unequal treaties, in which China was forced to concede to foreign powers, marking the start of its century of humiliation. Chapter 3. Civilian, Economic and Cultural Impacts. The First Opium War had devastating consequences for China's civilian population and economy. The widespread addiction to opium had already crippled Chinese society, affecting everyone from peasants to government officials. As opium use spread, the social fabric of China began to unravel, and the economy suffered as silver, the backbone of China's currency system, flowed out of the country in exchange for the drug. Opium dens became common in Chinese cities, and the addiction crisis caused widespread poverty, crime and a loss of productivity across large sections of the population. The war also dealt a significant blow to China's international standing and cultural pride. The Qing dynasty, once the dominant power in Asia, found itself humiliated by a foreign empire that was thousands of miles away. The concept of Sinocentrism, the belief that China was the center of civilization, was challenged in a way that left lasting scars on the national psyche. In Britain, the war was seen as a necessary defense of free trade, but it also sparked debates over the morality of the opium trade. Critics like William Gladstone, a future British Prime Minister, denounced the war as unjust, pointing to the devastating effects of opium on China's people. However, the profits from the trade were too great for Britain to abandon. Chapter 4. The Second Opium War. Though the Treaty of Nanjing ended the First Opium War, it did not resolve the deeper tensions between China and foreign powers. Over the next decade, China struggled to implement the treaty's terms, and tensions remained high as opium continued to flood the country. By the mid-1850s, disputes over treaty enforcement, foreign rights in China, and the ongoing opium trade led to the outbreak of the Second Opium War in 1856. The conflict began when Chinese officials seized a British-registered ship, the Arrow, sparking outrage in Britain. Using this incident as a pretext, Britain, this time joined by France, launched a new military campaign against the Qing dynasty. The Second Opium War was even more destructive than the first. British and French forces captured Canton in 1857 and advanced to Beijing in 1860. In one of the most notorious events of the war, British and French troops looted and destroyed the old summer palace outside Beijing, a symbol of Chinese cultural heritage. The war ended with the signing of the Treaty of Tientsin in 1858, followed by the Convention of Peking in 1860. These treaties forced China to open even more ports to foreign trade, legalize the opium trade, which had been the root cause of the conflict, allow foreign envoys to establish permanent legations in Beijing, thus increasing foreign influence in the Qing court. The Second Opium War further weakened the Qing dynasty, deepening China's dependence on foreign powers and increasing internal instability, which would contribute to later uprisings such as the Taiping Rebellion. One of the most significant consequences was the Taiping Rebellion, 1850–1864. Partly motivated by deep resentment toward foreign influence and the Qing government's inability to protect China's sovereignty, the rebellion quickly grew into one of the deadliest conflicts in human history. Led by Hong Xiuquan, a charismatic figure who claimed to be the younger brother of Jesus Christ, the Taiping movement sought to establish a heavenly kingdom and overthrow the Qing dynasty. The rebellion drew in millions of followers, and the resulting war devastated China, causing the deaths of an estimated 20 to 30 million people. Chapter 5. Conclusion. The Opium Wars had far-reaching consequences for both China and Britain. For China, the wars marked the beginning of the Century of Humiliation, a period during which the Qing dynasty was repeatedly forced to cede territory, pay large indemnities, and grant trading privileges to foreign powers. The legacy of these conflicts created deep resentment and weakened the central government, contributing to the eventual collapse of the Qing dynasty in 1912. For Britain, the Opium Wars solidified its dominance in the global trade system, allowing it to expand its influence in Asia. The acquisition of Hong Kong would become a lasting symbol of British imperialism, and the trade routes opened through these conflicts laid the foundation for British dominance in the region for decades to come. However, the wars also raised questions about the ethics of empire. While Britain gained economically, the human cost in China was profound, as addiction, poverty, and social disintegration plagued Chinese society for generations. The Opium Wars serve as a stark reminder of the power dynamics that defined 19th century imperialism, where profit, control, and dominance often outweighed moral considerations, leaving a legacy of conflict and exploitation that reverberates into modern times. Thank you for joining us as we explored the Opium Wars. Stay with us here at HistoryCrafts as we continue to uncover the most pivotal moments and figures from our shared past. This is HistoryCrafts, where history crafts itself.